Hello, and welcome everybody. And what's up? I missed last Friday's one because there was just too much going on getting ready for Christmas. What about you? How did you get on? Did you cope okay? Are you having a nice break or are you having to work through? I hope that you're getting a little bit of time for yourself. I'm hoping that you can get a little bit of chill space. At the moment, literally in New Zealand, chill is a good thing because it's summer and it's hot. Yeah, well, it is for some of us anyway. Not necessarily everybody, but some of you are in the northern hemisphere and you're in cold conditions with snow and things like that. All stuff that make for a very traditional looking Christmas, but not necessarily comfortable. I hope that wherever you are, you can find something to be a little bit more pleasant and comfortable than what it might otherwise be. Anyway, what are you here for? What am I here for? I'm here because I read old-fashioned children's stories. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories. I read the stories that I grew up reading, and so did my parents, and so did my grandparents. Why? Because why not? There's a whole lot of stories that you can't find anymore, that people don't actually have any experience of, that they have missed out on a view of the world and the way people thought because those stories are no longer available. And so I just decided, why not read them and share them with other people? Because sometimes it's really nice to get out of the headspace that we live in and just experience something in a different time and place. Sometimes it's a good reminder that we've actually got things better than we thought. Sometimes it's a good reminder that the world has progressed. It's not always in good ways, but generally things are a lot better than they were for a lot of things. Our health opportunities are better than they were. Yes, we have horrible diseases like COVID-19, but it's not the Black Death. We do know what causes it. It's not some magical dark air that is killing us or anything like that. There are things that can be done, and there's a lot of things like that where I think we need to actually appreciate what we have rather than just bemoaning what we don't have at the moment. Is there anything you need to know? Yes, there is. This is a lurk safe place. You are most welcome to sit and listen or stand or lie on the ground or whatever you want. You're most welcome to listen to the stories without having to interact with chat or anything like that. This is not a fast chat type stream for those of you who are watching live. You're most welcome to chat, but I don't chat during the chapters. I chat in chapter breaks or at the beginning and the end. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, you're most welcome to write them in the chat box. I may answer them, if it's appropriate, in the chapter break. Otherwise, I will just, ignore it. Anyway, good idea to have something to drink with you to keep yourself hydrated. It's a very good way to keep your brain working, keeping yourself hydrated, and also have something to snack on and somewhere comfortable to sit or lie down or whatever, so you can enjoy the story and let your mind just drift with the story instead of being stuck in the here and now. It's quite okay if you are listening while you are doing something else, such as working, studying, whatever. If that's appropriate for you, you're most welcome to. I don't feel the need to have your full attention. This is not a classroom. There will not be a test afterwards, probably not. If you miss a section of the story that we are currently reading, when I'm reading it live on Twitch, it will be available over on YouTube in one of the playlists that I create over there in about 2 weeks' time. So don't panic if you miss a section of a story and you want to catch up. You might have to wait, but you will be able to actually catch up with the rest of the story. And for those of you who haven't been there yet, going over to my YouTube channel, there is a link below in Twitch, is a great way to discover some other new books, new old books, obviously, if you want some other things to listen to. What else? I think that's about it. We're currently reading a book called Five Children and It by Edith Nesbit, E. Nesbit. We've had several other books by her. One of her most famous ones is The Railway Children, and we have actually had that. And most people these days know of it because of various movie versions and also, I think, a TV series from when a lot of us were growing up. So that's how a lot of us know her stories. This is a different one. This is one which is about a sand fairy, also known as a Samiad. So we shall carry on. We're not on the last reading yet. She tends to write fairly long chapters, so we've got at least one more day's reading after today. We shall see how we go today as to how much we read. Okay, we shall carry on. Five Children and It by Edith Nesbit. Chapter 8. Bigger than the baker's boy. Look here, said Cyril. I've got an idea. Does it hurt much? Said Robert sympathetically. Don't be a jackanape. I'm not humbugging. Shut up, Bobs, said Anthea. Silence for the squirrel's oration, said Robert. So Bobs is Robert, and the squirrel is Cyril. The family nicknames for each other. I'm just going to open up another window on my computer so I can find the pictures to share with you. Sorry about this. I thought I had everything set up, but not, apparently. The usual. I have a checklist, and I work through the checklist, and somehow I still manage to forget where I got up to. That's okay. We get there. We do. We eventually get there. I'm just going to find the right picture to give you for the next section. Sorry, I really am trying to find it. Aha. I think I've got it. It's such an epic effort sometimes to actually get the information I need and put it in the right place so that you can see it. Right, here we go. I'm just waiting for that to load up, but I can carry on reading. Silence for the squirrel's oration, said Robert. Cyril balanced himself on the edge of the water butt in the backyard where they all happened to be and spoke. Now, a water butt is a rain barrel, is another nickname for it. Often it was actually an old barrel. These days it will be a plastic tank for most people, and you're catching rainwater off the roof of, say, a garden shed or something like that, and it's often used for watering the garden, especially the vegetable garden. So the children are beside the water butt in the backyard where they all happened to be and spoke. Friends, Romans, countrymen and women, we found a Samiad. We have had wishes, we have had wings, and being beautiful as the day. That was pretty jolly beastly, if you like. And wealth and castles and that rotten gypsy business with the lamb. That was when they wanted the baby. That's then the one that they nicknamed the lamb. To be liked and wanted by everybody, and that caused a lot of problems. That rotten gypsy business with the lamb, but we're no further forward. We haven't really got anything worth having for our wishes. We've had things happening, said Robert. That's always something. It's not enough unless they're the right things, said Cyril firmly. Now I've been thinking. Not really, said Robert. He's a bit of a stirrer. In the silent what's-its-names of the night, it's like suddenly being asked something out of history, the date of the conquest or something. You know it all right all the time, but when you're asked, it all goes out of your head. Ladies and gentlemen, you know jolly well that when we're all rotting about in the usual way, heaps of things keep cropping up, and then real earnest wishes come into the heads of the beholder. Hear, hear, said Robert. Of the beholder, however stupid he is, Cyril went on, why even Robert might happen to think of a really useful wish if he didn't injure his poor little brains trying so hard to think. Shut up, Bobs, I tell you. You'll have the whole show over. A struggle on the edge of a water butt is exciting but damp. When it was over and the boys were partly dried, Anthea said, "It really was you began it, Bobs. Now Honor is satisfied. Do let Squirrel go on. We're wasting the whole morning," because they want to go and have another wish. And they've realised that a good idea to actually come up with a plan for asking for a particular wish. And I don't think the children had realised just how often they say, "I wish da-da-da-da-da. I wish it was like this all the time." And they're just using it as a figure of speech. But the Samoyed takes it literally and gives them what they wish for. So they're learning this, and they're learning that they need to be a little bit more strategic with their wishes, which is what they're trying to do. But they keep getting distracted. They're kids. "Well then," said Cyril, still wringing the water out of the tails of his jacket, "I'll call it Pax if Bobs will." "Pax, then," said Robert sulkily, "but I've got a lump as big as a cricket ball over my eye." Pax being a call for peace, an agreement for peace. Anthea patiently offered a dust-coloured handkerchief, and Robert bathed his wounds in silence. "Now, Squirrel," she said, "well then, let's just play bandits or forts or soldiers or any of the old games. We're dead sure to think of something if we try not to. You always do." The others consented. Bandits was hastily chosen for the game. "It is as good as anything else," said Jane gloomily. It must be owned that Robert was at first but a half-hearted bandit. But when Anthea had borrowed from Martha the red-spotted handkerchief in which the keeper had brought her mushrooms that morning, and had tied up Robert's head with it so that he could be the wounded hero who had saved the bandit captain's life the day before, he cheered up wonderfully. All were soon armed, bows and arrows slung on the back look well, and umbrellas and cricket stumps through the belt give a fine impression of the wearers being armed to the teeth. The white cotton hats that men wear in the country nowadays have a very brigandish effect when a few turkey's feathers are stuck in them. The lamb's mail cart was covered with a red and blue checked tablecloth and made an admirable baggage wagon. The lamb asleep inside it was not at all in the way, so the banditti set out, that's the troop of bandits, the banditti set out along the road that led to the sand pit, which is where the Samoyed is. "We ought to be near the Samoyed," said Cyril, "in case we think of anything suddenly. It is all very well to make up your minds to play bandit or chess or ping-pong or any other agreeable game, but it is not easy to do it with spirit when all the wonderful wishes you can think of or can't think of are waiting for you around the corner." The game was dragging a little, and some of the bandits were beginning to feel that the others were disagreeable things, and were saying so candidly when the baker's boy came along the road with loaves in a basket. The opportunity was not one to be lost. "Stand and deliver!" cried Cyril. "Your money or your life," said Robert. And they stood on each side of the baker's boy. Unfortunately, he did not seem to enter into the spirit of the thing at all. He was a baker's boy of an unusually large size. He merely said, "Chuck it now, d'ye hear?" and pushed the bandits aside most disrespectfully. Then Robert lassoed him with Jane's skipping rope, and instead of going round his shoulders, as Robert intended, it went round his feet and tripped him up. The basket was upset. The beautiful new loaves went bumping and bouncing all over the dusty chalk road. The girls ran to pick them up, and all in a moment Robert and the baker's boy were fighting it out, man to man, with Cyril to see fair play, and the skipping rope twisting around their legs like an interesting snake that wished to be a peacemaker. It did not succeed. Indeed, the way the boxwood handles of the skipping rope sprung up and hit the fighters on the shins and ankles was not at all peacemaking. I know this is the second fight or contest in this chapter, but I can't help it. It was that sort of day. You know yourself there are days when rows seem to keep on happening quite without your meaning them to. If I were a writer of tales of adventure, such as those which used to appear in The Boys of England when I was young, of course I should be able to describe the fight, but I cannot do it. I never can see what happens during a fight, even when it is only dogs. Also, if I had been one of these Boys of England writers, Robert would have got the best of it. But I am like George Washington. I cannot tell a lie, even about a cherry tree. Much less about a fight, and I cannot conceal from you that Robert was badly beaten. For the second time that day. The baker's boy blacked his other eye, and being ignorant of the first rules of fair play and gentlemanly behaviour, he also pulled Robert's hair. There you go. Pulled Robert's hair. There's Robert getting his hair pulled by the baker's boy. And there's the basket that the loaves are meant to be in. And there's bits of skipping rope on the ground as well. Oh dear. What a problem. He also pulled Robert's hair and kicked him on the knee. Robert always used to say that he could have licked the baker if it hadn't been for the girls, but I am not sure. Anyway, what happened was this, and very painful it was to self-respecting boys. Cyril was just tearing off his coat so as to help his brother in proper style, when Jane threw her arms round his legs and began to cry and ask him not to go and be beaten too. That, too, was very nice for Robert, as you can imagine, but it was nothing to what he felt when Anthea rushed in between him and the baker's boy and caught that unfair and degraded fighter round the waist, imploring him not to fight any more. "Oh, don't hurt my brother any more," she said in floods of tears. "He didn't mean it. It's only play, and I'm sure he's sorry." Sorry, I'm just going to put the next picture in here. Whoopsie. Yep, that did get in the right place. He didn't mean it. It's only play, and I'm sure he's very sorry. You see how unfair this was to Robert, because if the baker's boy had had any right and chivalrous instincts and had yielded to Anthea's pleading and accepted her despicable apology, Robert could not in honour have done anything to him at any future time. There you go. But Robert's fears, if he had any, were soon dispelled. Chivalry was a stranger to the breast of the baker's boy. He pushed Anthea away very roughly, and he chased Robert with kicks and unpleasant conversation right down the road to the sandpit, and there, with one last kick, he landed him in a heap of sand. "I'll loan you, you young varmint," he said, and went off to pick up his loaves and go about his business. Ooh, that was probably not the best place for them to have ended up. We're going to find out in a minute, aren't we? Cyril, impeded by Jane, could do nothing without hurting her, for she clung round his legs with the strength of despair. The baker's boy went off red and damp about the face, abusive to the last. He called them a pack of silly idiots and disappeared round the corner. Then Jane's grasp loosened. Cyril turned away in silent dignity to follow Robert, and the girls followed him, weeping without restraint. It was not a happy party that flung itself down in the sand beside the sobbing Robert, for Robert was sobbing, mostly with rage, though of course I know that a really heroic boy is always dry-eyed after a fight, but then he always wins, which has not been the case with Robert. Cyril was angry with Jane. Robert was furious with Anthea. The girls were miserable, and not one of the four was pleased with the baker's boy. Therefore, there was, as French writers say, a silence full of emotion. Then Robert dug his toes and his hands into the sand and wiggled in his rage. "He'd better wait till I'm grown up, the cowardly brute. Beast! I hate him, but I'll pay him out just because he's bigger than me." "You began," said Jane incautiously. "I know I did, silly, but I was only jollying, and he kicked me. Look here." Robert tore down a stocking, that's his sock, and showed a purple bruise touched up with red. "I only wish I was bigger than him, that's all." Oh dear. He dug his fingers in the sand and sprang up, for his hand had touched something furry. It was a Samoyed, of course, on the lookout to make sillies of them as usual, as Cyril remarked later. And of course the next moment Robert's wish was granted. and he was bigger than the baker's boy. Oh, but much, much bigger. He was bigger than the big policeman who used to be at the crossing at the mansion house years ago. The one who was so kind in helping old ladies over the crossing, and he was the biggest man I have ever seen, as well as the kindest. No one had a foot rule in his pocket, so Robert could not be measured, but he was still taller than your father would be if he stood on your mother's head, which I am sure he would never be unkind enough to do. He must have been 10 or 11 feet high, and as broad as a boy of that height ought to be. His suit had fortunately grown too, and now he stood up in it with one of his enormous stockings turned down to show the gigantic bruise on his vast leg. Immense tears of fury still stood on his flushed, giant face. He looked so surprised, and he was so large to be wearing a turned-down collar outside of his jacket that the others could not help laughing, because gentlemen used to have a different style of dress to children, and so size-wise, he's much more like a gentleman, and yet he's dressed as a child. "The Psammead's done us again," said Cyril, and here's your picture. There's Robert standing above them all. There's the other 3 children, and they're in the gravel pit, the sand pit. "The Psammead's done us again." "Not us, me," said Robert. "If you'd got any decent feeling, you'd try to make it make you the same size. You've no idea how silly it feels," he added thoughtlessly. "And I don't want to. I can jolly well see how silly it looks," Cyril was beginning. But Anthea said, "Oh, don't. I don't know what's the matter with you boys today. Look here, Squirrel, let's play fair. It is hateful for poor old Bobs all alone up there. Let's ask the Psammead for another wish, and if it will, I do really think we ought to all be made the same size." The others agreed, but not gaily. But when they found the Psammead, it wouldn't. "Not I," it said crossly, rubbing its face with its feet. "He's a rude, violent boy, and it'll do him good to be the wrong size for a bit. What did he want to come digging me out with his nasty wet hands for? He nearly touched me. He's a perfect savage. A boy of the Stone Age would have had more sense," because the Psammead's been around since the Stone Age. Robert's hands had indeed been wet with tears. There you go, that's what it was from. "Go away and leave me in peace, do," the Psammead went on. "I can't think why you don't wish for something sensible, something to eat or drink." Because that's it, as he's been telling them the sort of things that the prehistoric children used to wish for. Something to eat or drink, or good manners, or good tempers. Go along with you, do. It almost snarled as it shook its whiskers and turned a sulky brown back on them. The most hopeful felt that any further parley was vain, so they decided, no, let's just give it some space. They turned again to the colossal Robert. "Whatever shall we do?" they said, and they all said it. "First," said Robert grimly, "I'm going to reason with that baker's boy. I shall catch him at the end of the road." "Don't hit a chap smaller than yourself, old man," said Cyril. "Do I look like hitting him?" said Robert scornfully. "Why, I should kill him, but I'll give him something to remember. Wait till I pull up my stocking." He pulled up a stocking which was as large as a small bolster case and strode off. His strides were 6 or 7 feet long, so that it was quite easy for him to be at the bottom of the hill, ready to meet the baker's boy when he came down swinging the empty basket to meet his master's cart. So he's been up and done his dropping off the bread, and he's come back down the hill to where the master's cart is. Which had been leaving bread at the cottages along the road. Robert crouched behind a haystack in the farmyard that is at the corner, and when he heard the boy come whistling along, he jumped out at him and caught him by the collar. "Now," he said, and his voice was about 4 times its usual size, just as his body was 4 times its size. "I'm going to teach you to kick boys smaller than you." There you go. He lifted up the baker's boy and set him on the top of the haystack, which was about 16 feet off the ground. And there he sat down on the roof of then he sat down on the roof of the barn and told the baker's boy exactly what he thought of him. I don't think the boy heard it all. He was in a sort of trance of terror. When Robert had said everything he could think of, and some things twice over, he shook the boy and said, "And now get down the best way you can," and left him. Oh, my goodness. That's a bit different, isn't it? Getting ready for the next one, and I'll carry on reading. I don't know how the baker's boy got down, but I do know that he missed the cart and got into the very hottest of hot water when he turned up at last at the bakehouse. So it had probably taken him a little while to actually get down. I am sorry for him, but after all, it was quite right that he should be taught that boys mustn't use their feet when they fight, but their fists. Of course, the water he got into only became hotter when he tried to tell his master about the boy he had licked and the giant as high as a church, because no one could possibly believe such a tale as that. Next day, the tale was believed, but that was too late to be of any use to the baker's boy. I hope that you didn't miss anything just then. That was too late to be... I'll just read that line again. The next day the tale was believed, but that was too late to be of any use to the baker's boy. When Robert rejoined the others, he found them in the garden. Anthea had thoughtfully asked Martha to let them have dinner out there, because the dining room was rather small, and it would have been so awkward to have a brother the size of Robert in there. The lamb, who had slept peacefully during the whole stormy morning, was now found to be sneezing, and Martha said he had a cold and would be better indoors, which means that they don't have to worry about the baby. Anyway, we'll carry on. We're getting there. And really it is just as well, said Cyril, for I don't believe he'd have ever stopped screaming if he'd once seen you, the awful size you are. Robert was indeed what a draper would call an outsize in boys. He found himself able to step right over the iron gate in the front garden. Martha brought out the dinner. It was cold veal and baked potatoes with sago pudding and stewed plums to follow. She, of course, did not notice that Robert was anything but the usual size, and she gave him as much meat and potatoes as usual and no more, because they They wished one of their wishes had been a longer term one, that the servants would never notice anything different about the children, which we've had explained in one of the previous chapters. But that's why she wasn't freaking out about seeing Robert at a strange size, because to her he just looks normal. She gave him as much meat and potatoes as usual and no more. You have no idea how small your usual helping of dinner looks when you are many times your proper size. Robert groaned and asked for more bread, but Martha would not go on giving more bread forever. She was in a hurry because the keeper intended to call on his way to Benenhurst Fair, and she wished to be smartly dressed before he came. So the keeper is someone that she's going out with, I think, walking out with. I wish we were going to the fair, said Robert. You can't go anywhere that size, said Cyril. Why not, said Robert. They have giants at fairs, much bigger ones than me. Not much they don't, said Cyril. When Jane screamed, "Oh!" with such loud suddenness that they all thumped her on the back and asked whether she had swallowed a plumstone. "No," she said, breathless from being thumped. It's not a plumstone, it's an idea. Let's take Robert to the fair and get them to give us money for showing him. Then we shall get something out of the old Samoyed at last. Take me indeed, said Robert indignantly. Much more likely me take you. And so it turned out. The idea appealed irresistibly to everyone but Robert, and even he was brought round by Anthea's suggestion that he should have a double share of any money they might make. There was a little old pony cart in the coach house, the kind that is called a governess's cart. It seemed desirable to get to the fair as quickly as possible, so Robert, who could now take enormous steps and go so very fast indeed, consented to wheel the others in this. It was as easy to him now as wheeling the lamb in the mail cart, which had been in the morning. So that we've already dealt with in the morning. The lamb's cold prevented his being of the party. It was a strange sensation being wheeled. Hello, where's my picture? I did put one there, but it's not doing it. Okay, we'll try again. Sorry. Just waiting for this picture to load. There we go. Turn that. And the bit that comes off the corner there is because I have a beam behind me, which is not behind the green screen. It was a strange sensation being wheeled in a pony carriage by a giant. Everyone enjoyed the journey except Robert and the few people they passed on the way. These mostly went into what looked like some kind of standing up fits by the roadside. As Anthea said, just outside Benninhurst, Robert hid in a barn and the others went on to the fair. Let's see what happens. There were some swings and a hooting, tooting, blaring merry-go-round and a shooting gallery and Aunt Sally's Aunt Sally, it's kind of like a dressed up character. But I can't remember if it's like a guy, like you have it at Guy Fawkes, where it's a fake, like a mannequin type thing, or if it's actually a person dressed up like that. I think it's like a mannequin dressed up. And I don't know what the story is with those. So somebody who's listening can look that up, find out about an Aunt Sally. And then maybe put the explanation in the chat box alongside so we can find out. And then I can read it to everybody else. So while I carry on reading, you can look that up. And some Aunt Sally's. Resisting an impulse to win a coconut, or at least to attempt the enterprise, Cyril went up to the woman who was loading little guns before the array of glass bottles on strings against a sheet of canvas. So that was their version at the time of doing like a shooting range at the show, at the fair. "Here you are, little gentleman," she said. "Penny a shot?" "No, thank you," said Cyril. "We're here on business, not on pleasure." "Who's the master?" "The what?" "The master, the head, the boss of the show." "Over there," she said, pointing to a stout man in a dirty linen jacket who was sleeping in the sun. "But I don't advise you to wake him sudden. His temper's contrary, especially these hot days. Better have a shot while you're waiting." She's trying to sell the service. "It's rather important," said Cyril. "It'll be very profitable to him. I think he'll be sorry if we take it away." "Oh, if it's money in his pocket," said the woman. "No kid now. What is it?" "It's a giant." "You are kidding." "Come along and see," said Anthea. The woman looked doubtfully at them, then she called to a ragged little girl in striped stockings and a dingy white petticoat that came below her brown frock. The petticoat hung lower, the opposite usually, but obviously these are hand-me-down clothes. And leaving her in charge of the shooting gallery, she turned to Anthea and said, "Well, hurry up, but if you are kidding, you'd best say so. I'm as mild as milk myself, but my Bill, he's a fair terror, and—" Anthea led the way to the barn. "It really is a giant," she said. "He's a giant little boy, in a suit like my brother's there, and we didn't bring him up to the fair because people do stare so, and they seem to go into the kind of standing up fits when they see him, and we thought perhaps you'd like to show him and get pennies. And if you'd like to pay us something, you can, only it'll have to be rather a lot because we promised him he should have a double share of whatever we made." The woman murmured, something indistinct of which the children could only hear the words swell, me, barmy, and crumpet, which conveyed no definite idea in their minds. She had taken Anthea's hand and was holding it very firmly, and Anthea could not help wondering what would happen if Robert should have wandered off or turned his proper size during the interval. But she knew that the Psammead's gifts really did last till sunset, however inconvenient their lasting might be, and she did not think somehow that Robert would care to go out alone while he was that size. When they reached the barn and Cyril called "Robert," there was a stir among the loose hay, and Robert began to come out. His hand and arm came first, and then a foot and leg. When the woman saw the hand, she said, "My!" But when she saw the foot, she said, "Upon my word!" And when by slow and heavy degrees the whole of Robert's enormous bulk was at last disclosed, she drew a long breath and began to say many things, compared with which barmy and crumpet seemed quite ordinary. She dropped into understandable English at last. "What'll you take for him?" she said excitedly. "Anything in reason. We'll have a special van built. Leastways, I know where there's a second-hand one would do up handsome. What a baby elephant as died. What'll you take? He's soft, ain't he? Them giants mostly is, but I never see. No, never. What'll you take? Down on the nail. We'll beat him like a king. We'll treat him like a king and give him first-rate grub and a doss fit for a bloomin' duke. He must be dotty or he wouldn't need you kids to cart him about. What'll you take for him?" So she thinks they're selling him. "They won't take anything," said Robert sternly. "I'm no more soft than you are. Not so much, I shouldn't wonder. Not so soft as you are. I'll come and be a show for today if you'll give me," he hesitated at the enormous price he was about to ask, "if you'll give me 15 shillings. "Done," said the woman so quickly that Robert felt he had been unfair to himself and wished he had asked 30. "Come on now and see my bill, and we'll fix a price for the season. I dare say we might get as much as £2 a week regular. Come on and make yourself as small as you can, for gracious sake." This was not very small, and a crowd gathered quickly, because she doesn't want people seeing him before they can show him. This was not very small, and a crowd gathered quickly, so that it was at the head of an enthusiastic procession that Robert entered the trampled meadow where the fair was held, and passed over the stubby yellow dusty grass to the door of the biggest tent. He crept in, and the woman went to call her Bill. He was the big sleeping man, and he did not seem at all pleased at being awakened. Cyril, watching through a slit in the tent, saw him scowl and shake a heavy fist and a sleepy head. Then the woman went on speaking very fast. Cyril heard "Struth" and "biggest draw you ever, so help me," and he began to share Robert's feeling that 15 shillings was indeed far too little. Bill slouched up to the tent and entered. When he beheld the magnificent proportions of Robert, he said but little. "Strike me pink," were the only words the children could afterwards remember, but he produced 15 shillings, mainly in sixpences and coppers, and handed it to Robert. "We'll fix up about what you're to draw when the show's over tonight," he said with horse heartiness. "Lor, love a duck, you'll be that happy with us you'll never want to leave us. Can you do a song now, or a bit of a breakdown?" "Not today," said Robert, rejecting the idea of trying to sing. "As Once in May," a favourite of his mother's, and the only song he could think of at the moment. Rejecting the idea of trying to sing "As Once in May," a favourite of his mother's. "Get Levi and clear them bloomin' photos out. Clear the tent, stick out a curtain or something." The man went on. "Lor, what a pity we ain't got no tights his size, but we'll have him before the week's out. Young man, your fortune's made. It's a good thing you came to me and not to some chaps as I could tell you on. I've known blokes as beat their giants and starved him too. So I'll tell you straight, you're in luck this day if you ever was afore, 'cause I'm a lamb, I am, and I don't deceive you." "I'm not afraid of anyone beating me," said Robert, looking down on the lamb. Robert was crouched on his knees because the tent was not big enough for him to stand upright in, but even in that position he could still look down on most people. "But I am awfully hungry. I wish you'd get me something to eat." "Here, Becca," said the horse Bill, "get him some grub, the best you got, mind." Another whisper followed, of which the children only heard down in the black and white, first thing tomorrow." Then the woman went to get the food. It was only bread and cheese when it came, but it was delightful to the large and empty Robert. And the man went to post sentinels round the tent to give the alarm if Robert should attempt to escape with his 15 shillings. Okay, so they've got some little plan going on by the sound of it. Yes. The fact that she was assuming that he was not very bright should have been a slight indication that they were possibly thinking of making the most of the situation and him being shortchanged somewhere along the line. We'll carry on. "As if we weren't honest," said Anthea indignantly when the meaning of the sentinels dawned on her. Then began a very strange and wonderful afternoon. Bill was a man who knew his business. In a very little while, the photographic views, the spy-glasses you look at them through so that they really seem rather real, and the lights you see them by, were all packed away. A curtain, it was an old red and black carpet really, was run across the tent. Robert was concealed behind, and Bill was standing on a trestle table outside the tent making a speech. It was rather a good speech. It began by saying that the giant it was his privilege to introduce to the public that day was the eldest son of the Emperor of San Francisco, compelled through an unfortunate love affair with the Duchess of the Fiji Islands to leave his own country and take refuge in England, the land of liberty, where freedom was the right of every man, no matter how big he was. It ended by the announcement that the first 20 who came to the tent door should see the giant for 3 apiece. "After that," said Bill, "the price is riz, and I don't undertake to say what it won't be riz to, so now's your time." So he's really upselling. A young man with his sweetheart on her afternoon out was the first to come forward. For this occasion, his was the princely attitude. No expense spared. Money no object. His girl wished to see the giant? Well, she should see the giant, even though seeing the giant cost 3p or 3p each. And the other entertainments are all penny ones. So this is 3 times the standard price, and it's going to go up. The flap of the tent was raised. The couple entered. Next moment, a wild shriek from the girl thrilled through all present. Bill slapped his leg. "That's done the trick," he whispered to Becca. It was indeed a splendid advertisement for the charms of Robert. When the young girl came out, she was pale and trembling, and a crowd was round the tent. And hopefully, here you go. When the girl came out, she was pale and trembling. She's looking a little bit shaken, and that's probably her young man behind her. So, and that's a good advertisement to everybody else that what she has seen really did startle her. That's what Bill was happy about, was her response. "What was it like?" asked a farmhand. Just getting ready for the next one, so I can keep reading for you. "What was it like?" asked the farmhand. "Oh, horrid. You wouldn't believe," she said. "It's as big as a barn and that fierce. It froze the blood in my bones. I wouldn't have missed seeing it for anything." The fierceness was only caused by Robert's trying not to laugh, but the desire to do that soon left him, and before sunset he was more inclined to cry than laugh, and more inclined to sleep than either. For by ones and twos and threes people kept coming in all the afternoon, and Robert had to shake hands with those who wished it, and to allow himself to be punched and pulled and patted and thumped, so that people might make sure that he was really real. The other children sat on a bench and watched and waited, and were very bored indeed. It seemed to them that this was the hardest way of earning money that could have been invented, and only 15 shillings. Bill had taken 4 times that already, for the news of the giant had spread, and tradespeople in carts and gentlepeople in carriages came from far and near. One gentleman with an eyeglass and a very large yellow rose in his buttonhole offered Robert, in an obliging whisper, £10 a week to appear at the Crystal Palace. Robert had to say no. "I can't," he said regretfully. "It's no use promising what you can't do." "Ah, poor fellow, bound for a term of years, I suppose. Well, here's my card. When your time's up, come to me." And this should be this one. Yes, there you go. So there's Robert kneeling, half kneeling, talking to the gentleman who's inviting him to go up and be on show at the Crystal Palace in London. At the World Expo. I will if I'm the same size then," said Robert truthfully. "If you grow a bit, so much the better," said the gentleman. When he had gone, Robert beckoned Cyril and said, "Tell them I must and will have a rest, and I want my tea." Tea was provided in a paper hastily pinned on the tent. It said, "Closed for half an hour while the giant gets his tea." Then there was a hurried council. Sorry, just trying to do the next one. Then there was a hurried council. "How am I to get away?" said Robert. "I've been thinking about it all the afternoon." "Why, walk out when the sun sets and you're your right size. They can't do anything to us." Robert opened his eyes. "Why, they'd nearly kill us," he said, "when they saw me get my right size. We must think of some other way. We must be alone when the sun sets." Ooh, that's a good point. What are they going to do? How are they going to handle that? "I know," said Cyril briskly, and he went to the door, outside which Bill was smoking a clay pipe, and talked in a low voice to Becca. Cyril heard him say, "Good as having a fortune left you." "Look here," said Cyril, "you can let people come in again in a minute. He's nearly finished tea, but he must be left alone when the sun sets. He's very queer at that time of day, and if he's worried, I won't answer for the consequences." "Why, what comes over him?" asked Bill. "I don't know. It's sort of a change," said Cyril candidly. "He isn't at all like himself. You'd hardly know him. He's very queer indeed. Someone will get hurt if he's not alone about sunset." This was true. "He'll pull round for the evening, I suppose." "Oh, yes, half an hour after sunset he'll be quite himself again." That's accurate. "Best humour him," said the woman. And so, at what Cyril judged was about half an hour before sunset, the tent was again closed whilst the giant gets his supper. The crowd was very merry about the giant's meals and their coming so close together. "Well, he can pick a bit," Bill owned. "You see, he has to eat hearty, being the size he is." Inside the tent, the four children breathlessly arranged a plan of retreat. "You go now," said Cyril to the girls, "and get along home as fast as you can. Oh, never mind the pony cart. We'll get that tomorrow. Robert and I are dressed the same. We'll manage somehow like Sydney Carton did. Only you girls must get out or it's all a no-go. We can run, but you can't, whatever you may think." "No, Jane, it's no good Robert going out and knocking people down. The police would follow him till he turned his proper size and then arrest him in a shot. Go you must. If you don't, I will never speak to you again. It was you who got us into this mess, really, hanging around people's legs the way you did this morning. Go, I tell you." And Jane and Anthea went. "We're going home," they said to Bill. "We're leaving the giant with you. Be kind to him." And that, as Anthea said afterwards, was very deceitful. But what were they to do? When they had gone, Cyril went to Bill. "Look here," he said, "he wants some ears of corn. There's some in the next field but one. I'll just run and get it. Oh, and he says, can't you loop up the tent at the back a bit? He says he's stifling for a breath of air. I'll see no one peeps in at him. I'll cover him up and he can take a nap while I go for the corn. He will have it. There's no holding him when he gets like this." The giant was made comfortable with a heap of sacks and an old tarpaulin. The curtain was looped up and the brothers were left alone. They matured their plan in whispers. Outside, the merry-go-round blared out its comic tunes, screaming now and then to attract public notice. Half a minute after the sun had set, a boy came out past Bill. I'm off for the corn, he said, and mingled quickly with the crowd. At the same instant, a boy came out of the back of the tent, past Becca, posted there as sentinel. I'm off for the corn, said this boy also. And he too moved away quietly and was lost in the crowd. The front door boy was Cyril. The back door was Robert. Now, since sunset, once more his proper size. They walked quickly through the field along the road where Robert caught Cyril up. Then they ran. They were home as soon as the girls were, for indeed it was a long way, and they ran most of it. It was indeed a very long way, as they found when they had to go and drag the pony cart home the next morning, with no enormous Robert to wheel them in it as if it were a mail cart, and they were babies, and he was their gigantic nursemaid. I cannot possibly tell you what Bill and Becca said when they found that the giant had gone. For one thing, I do not know. And that's the end of that chapter. Ooh, that's a bit different, isn't it? Oh, goodness. Goodness, goodness, goodness. We'll see what happens in the next one in a minute. Now, do you have something to drink or eat? Just to keep yourself going. I'm having a break for a minute. That's good. Now, if you're following me here on, if you're watching here on Twitch, I don't know if you are already a Twitch member, but it doesn't cost you anything to be one. So you can sign up, and then if you click the heart button or the follow button, it's shaped like a heart, but it's called the follow button, then Twitch will notify you when I go live. And if you're watching this on YouTube, if you subscribe to my channel and click the bell, which is the notification icon, it will tell you when I put a new video up there. I take the videos that I record here on Twitch and I put them over on YouTube about 2 weeks later, because Twitch keeps them for 2 weeks and then after that they're gone. So I save them over to YouTube and you can watch them there. So if you haven't done that yet, open up a new tab in your browser. If you're on Twitch and you want to go to YouTube, the links for both, if you're watching on Twitch, the link for YouTube, but I'll try that again. The link for my YouTube channel is below the Twitch video window. So you can actually do that while you're waiting for me to start again. You can still hear me talking in the background. So there you go. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and you will you'll get notified when I put up my fresh videos. The water making bloop noises in my water bottle. And we shall carry on reading. We are reading 5 Children and It, the It being the Samiad or Sand Fairy, by E. Nesbit, and we are reading chapter 9, Grown Up. Cyril had once pointed out that ordinary life is full of occasions on which a wish would be most useful, and this thought filled his mind when he happened to wake early on the morning after Robert had wished to be bigger than the baker's boy, and had been it. The day that lay between these 2 days had been occupied entirely by getting the governess cart home from Benenhurst, which is where the fair was. Cyril dressed hastily. He did not take a bath because tin baths are so noisy, and he had no wish to rouse Robert, and he slipped off alone as Anthea had once done, and ran through the dewy morning to the sandpit. He dug up the Samiad very carefully and kindly, and began the conversation by asking whether it still felt any ill effects from the contact with the tears of Robert the day before yesterday. The Samiad was in good temper. It replied politely. "And now, what can I do for you?" it said. "I suppose you've come here so early to ask for something for yourself, something your brothers and sisters aren't to know about, eh? Now do be persuaded for your own good. Ask for a good fat megatherium and have done with it." A megatherium is a type of sea creature from the prehistoric period that the Samiad used to grant as a response for a wish to provide food for people, because that was what they would wish for. "Thank you, not today, I think," said Cyril cautiously. "What I really wanted to say was, you know how you're always wishing for things when you're playing at anything?" "I seldom play," said the Samoyed coldly. "Well, you know what I mean," Cyril went on impatiently. "What I want to say is, won't you let us have our wish just when we think of it, and just where we happen to be, so that we don't have to come and disturb you again?" asked the crafty Cyril. "It'll only end in your wishing for something you don't really want, as you did about the castle," said the Samoyed, stretching its brown arms and yawning. "It's always the same since people left off eating really wholesome things. However, have it your own way. Goodbye." "Goodbye," said Cyril politely. "I'll tell you what," said the Samoyed, suddenly shooting out its long snail's eyes. "I'm getting tired of you, all of you. You have no more sense than so many oysters. Go along with you." And Cyril went. "What an awful long time babies stay babies," said Cyril after the lamb had taken his watch out of his pocket while he wasn't noticing, and with coos and clucks of naughty rapture had opened the case and used the whole thing as a garden spade. And when even immersion in a wash basin had failed to wash the mould from the works and make the watch go again. Cyril had said several things in the heat of the moment, but now he was calmer, and had even consented to carry the lamb part of the way to the woods. Cyril had persuaded the others to agree to his plan, and not to wish for anything more till they really did wish it. Meantime, it seemed good to go to the woods for nuts, and on the mossy grass under the sweet chestnut tree the five were sitting. The lamb was pulling up the moss by fat handfuls, and Cyril was gloomily contemplating the ruins of his watch. And I think, yes, there you go. There is the lamb using Cyril's watch as a spade in the sand. And there's the others all playing together on the ground. I'll just see where I got up to in the actual words of the story. The lamb was pulling up the moss by fat handfuls, and Cyril was gloomily contemplating the ruins of his watch. "He does grow," said Anthea. "Doesn't do, precious." "Me grow," said the lamb cheerfully. "Me grow big boy. 'Ave guns and mouses and imagination or vocabulary gave out here. But anyway, it was the longest speech the lamb had ever made, and it charmed everyone. Are we heading for some wish that they are going to regret with a comment like that? I think so. Oh dear. Are they going to spontaneously wish for something they ought not to have wished for? Probably. I suppose he'll be grown up. I don't know, we've got that, but anyway, it was the longest speech the lamb had ever made, and it charmed everyone, even Cyril, who tumbled the lamb over and rolled him in the moss to the music of delighted squeals. Sorry, itchy nose now. "I suppose he'll be grown up some days," Anthea was saying, dreamily looking up at the blue of the sky that showed between the long, straight chestnut leaves. But at that moment the lamb, struggling gaily with Cyril, thrust a stout-shod little foot against his brother's chest. There was a crack. The innocent lamb had broken the glass of father's second-best Waterbury watch, which Cyril had borrowed without leave. "Grow up some day," said Cyril bitterly. I'm just going to wait. "Grow up some day," said Cyril bitterly, plumping the lamb down on the grass. "I dare say he will, when nobody wants him to. I wish to goodness he would." "Oh, take care," cried Anthea in an agony of apprehension. But it was too late. Like music to a song, her words and Cyril's came out together. Anthea, "Oh, take care." Cyril, "Grow up now." The faithful Samoyed was true to its promise, and there, before the horrified eyes of its brothers and sisters, the lamb suddenly and violently grew up. It was a most terrible moment. The change was not so sudden as the wish changes usually were. The baby's face changed first. It grew thinner and larger. Lines came in the forehead. The eyes grew more deep-set and darker in colour. The mouth grew longer and thinner. Most terrible of all, a little dark moustache appeared on the lip of one who was still, except as to the face, a 2-year-old baby in a linen smock, and white openwork socks. "Oh, I wish it wouldn't. Oh, I wish it wouldn't. You boys might wish as well." They all wished hard, for the sight was enough to dismay the most heartless. They all wished so hard indeed that they felt quite giddy and almost lost consciousness. Oh dear. I'm just looking for the next page. But the wishing was quite vain, for when the wood ceased to whirl round, their dazed eyes were riveted at once by the spectacle of a very proper-looking young man in flannels and a straw hat, a young man who wore the same little black moustache which had just before they had actually seen growing upon the baby's lip. This, then, was the lamb, grown up, their own lamb. It was a terrible moment. The grown-up lamb moved gracefully across the moss and settled himself against the trunk of the sweet chestnut. He tilted the straw hat over his eyes. He was evidently weary. He was going to sleep. The lamb, the original little tiresome beloved lamb, often went to sleep at odd times and in unexpected places. Was this new lamb in the grey flannel suit and the pale green necktie like the other lamb, or had his mind grown up together with his body? That's a good point. This is the actual description that goes with this is coming. We haven't quite got to it, but that's the grown up there is the lamb. That was the question which the others in a hurried council held among the yellow brake fern a few yards from the sleeper, debated eagerly. "Whichever it is, it'll be just awful," said Anthea. "If his inside senses are grown up too, he won't stand our looking after him. And if he's still a baby inside of him, how on earth are we to get him to do anything? And it'll be getting on for dinner time in a minute." "And we haven't got any nuts," said Jane. "Oh, bother nuts." Remember, they'd gone to the woods to get some nuts. "Oh, bother nuts," said Robert. "But dinner's different. I didn't have half enough dinner yesterday. Couldn't we tie him to the tree and go home to our dinner and come back afterwards?" "A fat lot of dinner we would get if we went back without the lamb," said Cyril in scornful misery. "And it'll be just the same as if we go back with him in the state he is now. Yes, I know it's my doing. Don't rub it in. I know I'm a beast and not fit to live. You can take that for settled and say no more about it. The question is, what are we going to do?" "Let's wake him up and take him into Rochester or Maidstone and get something to eat at a baker's shop," said Robert hopefully. "Take him," repeated Cyril. "Yes, do. It's all my fault. I don't deny that, but you'll find you've got your work cut out for you if you try to take that young man anywhere. The lamb always was spoilt, but now he's grown up he's a demon. Simply. I can see it. Look at his mouth." "Well then," said Robert, "let's wake him up and see what he'll do. Perhaps he'll take us to Maidstone and stand a treat. He ought to have a lot of money in the pockets of those extra special pants. We must have dinner anyway." They drew lots with little bits of brake fern. It fell to Jane's lot to waken the grown-up lamb. She did it gently by tickling his nose with a twig of honeysuckle. He said, "Bother the flies," twice, then opened his eyes. And that's what you've got in this picture here. That's Jane with a piece of honeysuckle tickling his nose. You can't quite see the stem of it. That's doing the tickling part. But that's okay. Sorry, just getting ready for the next one. And we shall carry on. "Hello, kiddies," he said in a languid tone. "Still here? What's the giddy hour? You'll be late for your grub." "I know we shall," said Robert bitterly. "Then cut along home," said the grown-up lamb. "What about your grub, though?" said Jane. "Oh, how far is it to the station, do you think? I've a sort of notion that I'll run up to town and have some lunch at the club." Blank misery fell like a pall on the four others. The lamb, alone, unattended, would go to town and have lunch at a club. A gentleman's club. They were a thing, not like a music and dance club like we have these days. Where are we? Perhaps he would also have tea there. Perhaps sunset would come upon him amid the dazzling luxury of clubland, and a helpless, cross, sleepy baby would find itself alone amid unsympathetic waiters, and would wail miserably for Panty from the depths of the club armchair. The picture moved Anthea almost to tears, Panty being the way the child used to say Anthea, because it's the vowel rhyme. "Oh no, lamb ducky, you mustn't do that," she cried, incautiously. The grown-up lamb frowned. "My dear Anthea," he said, "how often am I to tell you that my name is Hilary or Saint Maur or Devereux? Any of my baptismal names are free to my little brothers and sisters, but not Lamb, a relic of foolishness and far-off childhood." This was awful. He was their elder brother now, was he? Well, of course he was, if he was grown up, since they weren't. Thus in whispers, Anthea and Robert. They were discussing that. But the almost daily adventures resulting from the Psammead's wishes were making the children wise beyond their years. Not beforehand, but after they've had the experiences. That's good. "Dear Hilary," said Anthea, and the others choked at the name, "you know father didn't wish you to go to London. He wouldn't like us to be left alone without you to take care of us. Oh, deceitful thing that I am," she added to herself. "Look here," said Cyril, "if you're our elder brother, why not behave as such and take us over to Maidstone and give us a jolly good blowout, and we'll go on the river afterwards?" "I'm infinitely obliged to you," said the lamb courteously, "but I should prefer solitude. Go home to your lunch, your dinner. Perhaps I may look in about tea time, or I may not be home till after you are in your beds." Their beds. Speaking glances flashed between the wretched four, because the lamb doesn't understand that he's going to go back to being the baby at sunset. The others understand, and that may cause some problems. Speaking glances flashed between the wretched four. Much bed there would be for them if they went home without the lamb. "We promised mother not to lose sight of you if we took you out," Jane said before the others could stop her. "Look here, Jane," said the grown-up lamb, putting his hands in his pockets and looking down at her. "Little girls should be seen and not heard. You kids must learn not to make yourselves a nuisance. Run along home now, and perhaps if you're good I'll give you each a penny tomorrow." "Look here," said Cyril in the best man-to-man tone at his command. "Where are you going, old man? You might let Bobs and me come with you, even if you don't want the girls." This was really rather noble of Cyril, for he never did care much about being seen in public with the lamb, who of course after sunset would be a baby again. The man-to-man tone succeeded. "I shall run over to Maidstone on my bike," said the new lamb airily, fingering the little black moustache. "I shall run over to Maidstone on my bike. I can lunch at the Crown, and perhaps I'll have a pull on the river, but I can't take you all on the machine now, can I? Run along home like good children." The position was desperate. Robert exchanged a despairing look with Cyril. Anthea detached a pin from her waistband, a pin whose withdrawal left a gaping chasm between skirt and bodice, and handed it furtively to Robert, with a grimace of the darkest and deepest meaning. Robert slipped away to the road. There, sure enough, stood a bicycle, a beautiful new one. Of course, Robert understood at once that if the lamb was grown up, he must have a bicycle. Naturally. There, sure enough, stood a bicycle. So that's Robert in his hat without the jacket. This had always been one of Robert's own reasons for wishing to be grown up. He hastily began to use the pin. 11 punctures in the back tyre, 7 in the front. He would have made the total 22, but for the rustling of the yellow hazel leaves, which warned him of the approach of the others. He hastily leaned a hand on each wheel and was rewarded by the whoosh of what was left of air escaping from 18 neat pinholes. "Your bike's run down," said Robert, wondering how he could so soon have learned to deceive. "So it is," said Cyril. "It's a puncture," said Anthea, stooping down and standing up again with a thorn which she had got ready for the purpose. "Look here." The grown-up lamb, or Hilary as I suppose one must now call him, fixed his pump and blew up the tyre. The punctured state of it was soon evident. Yes, doesn't matter how much air you pump into this, it's going to keep on whooshing back out again. The punctured state of it was soon evident, and as soon as it shows, I shall show it to you. I'm just waiting for the picture to turn up. I suppose there's a cottage somewhere near where one could get a pail of water, said Hilary. Said the lamb. There was, and when the number of punctures had been made manifest, it was felt to be a special blessing that the cottage provided teas for cyclists. Yes, you use a bucket of water to find out where the punctures are in the inner tube of your tyre. I don't know if you have ever fixed a bicycle tyre, if you've ever done this to find out, because what... Just waiting for this picture to catch up. Sorry, here we go. Here he is. They're looking at the bicycle and discovering that it has punctures in the tyre. And when you're actually just looking at the outside of the tyre, you can't necessarily, if it's just a hole, a little hole, you can't necessarily tell where the holes are. So what you do is you take the inner tube off the rim and you inflate it as much as you can and you put it in water to see where the little streams of bubbles come out of, and that will show you where you need to fix it, to put a patch over it to stop it leaking the air out. And in this situation, there will be a lot of these little holes. Funny that. Oh dear. I'll get the next picture ready. I'm guessing that there's going to be another one. There was, and when the number of punctures had been made manifest, that means they could see how many holes there were, it was felt to be a special blessing that the cottage provided teas for cyclists. That's good. It provided an odd sort of tea and hammy meal for the lamb and his brothers. This was paid for out of the 15 shillings which had been earned by Robert when he was a giant, for the lamb, it appeared, had unfortunately no money about him. So it's just as well he didn't take them over to Maidstone. This was a great disappointment for the others, but it is a thing that will happen, even to the most grown-up of us. However, Robert had enough to eat, and that was something. Quietly but persistently, the miserable four took it in turns to try and persuade the lamb, or St. Maur, that's his other name, to spend the rest of the day in the woods. There was not very much of the day left by the time he had mended the 18th puncture. That's good. That's a good thing that's happening. He looked up from the completed work with a sigh of relief and suddenly put his tie straight. There's a lady coming, he said briskly. For goodness sake, get out of the way. Go home. Hide. Vanish somehow. I can't be seen with a pack of dirty kids. His brothers and sisters were indeed rather dirty because earlier in the day the lamb in his infant state had sprinkled a good deal of garden soil over them. The grown-up lamb's voice was so tyrant-like, as Jane said afterwards, that they actually retreated to the back garden and left him with his little moustache and his flannel suit to meet alone the young lady who now came up the front garden wheeling a bicycle. The woman of the house came out, and the young lady spoke to her. The lamb raised his hat as she passed him, and the children could not hear what she said, though they were craning round the corner and listening with all their ears. They felt it to be perfectly fair, as Robert said, with that wretched lamb in that condition. Perfectly fair to be listening. Sorry, I'm just going to check something. Yeah, okay, we're good. When the lamb spoke in a languid voice, heavy with politeness, they heard well enough. A puncture, he was saying. Can I not be of any assistance? If you could allow me. There was a stifled explosion of laughter, and the grown-up lamb, otherwise Devereaux, so the author's now giving us each of his names, turned the tail of an angry eye in its direction. You're very kind, said the lady, looking at the lamb. She looked rather shy, but as the boys put it, there didn't seem to be any nonsense about her. But, oh, whispered Cyril, I should have thought he'd had enough of bicycle mending for one day, and if only she knew that really and truly he's only a whiny, silly little baby. He's not, Anthea murmured angrily. He's a dear, if people only let him alone. It's our own precious lamb still, whatever silly idiots may turn him into. Isn't he, Puss? Jane doubtfully supposed so. Now the lamb, whom I must try to remember to call St. Maur, was examining the lady's bicycle and talking to her with a very grown-up manner indeed. No one could possibly have supposed to see and hear him that only that very morning he had been a chubby child of 2 years, breaking other people's Waterbury watches. Devereaux, as he ought to be called for the future, took out a gold watch which he had mended when he had mended the lady's bicycle, and all the hidden onlookers said, "Oh," because it seemed so unfair that the baby, who had only that morning destroyed 2 cheap but honest watches, should now, in the grown-upness to which Cyril's folly had raised him, have a real gold watch with a chain and seals. Hilary, as I will now term him, withered his brothers and sisters with a glance, and then said to the lady, with whom he seemed to be quite friendly, "If you will allow me, I will ride with you as far as the crossroads. It is getting late, and there are tramps about." No one will ever know what answer the young lady intended to give to this gallant offer, for directly Anthea heard it made, she rushed out, knocking against a swill pail which overflowed in a turbid stream, and caught the lamb, I suppose I ought to say Hilary, by the arm. The others followed, and in an instant the 4 dirty children were visible beyond disguise. "Don't let him," said Anthea to the lady, and she spoke with intense earnestness. "He's not fit to go with anyone." "Go away, little girl," said St. Maur, as well as we now call him, in a terrible voice. "Go home at once." You'd much better not have anything to do with him," the now reckless Anthea went on. "He doesn't know who he is. He's something very different from what you think he is." "What do you mean?" asked the lady, not unnaturally, while Devereaux, as I must term the grown-up lamb, tried vainly to push Anthea away. The others backed her up, and she stood solid as a rock. "You just let him go with you," said Anthea. "You'll soon see what I mean. How would you like to suddenly see a poor little helpless baby spinning along downhill beside you with its feet up on a bicycle it has lost control of?" The lady turned rather pale. "Who are these very dirty children?" she asked the grown-up lamb, sometimes called St. Maur in these pages. "I don't know," he replied miserably. "Oh, lamb, how can you," said Jane, "when you know perfectly well you're our own little baby brother that we're so fond of. We're his big brothers and sisters," she explained, turning to the lady who, with trembling hands, was now turning her bicycle toward the gate. "And we've got to take care of him, and we must get him home before sunset, or I don't know whatever will become of us. You see, he's sort of under a spell, enchanted. You know what I mean." Again and again the lamb, Devereaux I mean, had tried to stop Jane's eloquence, but Robert and Cyril held him, one by each leg, and no proper explanation was possible. The lady rode hastily away and electrified her relatives at dinner by telling them of her escape from a family of dangerous lunatics. The little girl's eyes were simply those of a maniac. "I can't think how she came to be at large," she said. When her bicycle had whizzed away down the road, Cyril spoke gravely. "Hilary, old chap," he said, "you must have had a sunstroke or something, and the things you've been saying to that lady, why, if we were to tell you the things you've said when you are yourself again, say tomorrow morning, you wouldn't ever understand them, let alone believe them. You trust me, old chap, and come home now, and if you're not yourself in the morning, we'll ask the milkman to ask the doctor to come." That's smart thinking, actually. The poor grown-up lamb, St. Maur was really one of his Christian names, seemed now too bewildered to resist. "Since you seem all to be as mad as the whole worshipful company of hatters," he said bitterly, "I suppose I had better take you home, but you're not to suppose I shall pass this over. I shall have something to say to you all tomorrow morning." "Yes, you will, my lamb," said Anthea under her breath, "but it won't be at all the sort of thing you think it's going to be." In her heart she could hear the pretty, soft, little loving voice of the baby lamb, so different from the affected tones of the dreadful grown-up lamb, one of whose names was Devereaux, saying, "Me love Panty, wants to come to own Panty." That's Anthea. "Oh, let's go home, for goodness sake," she said. "You can say whatever you like in the morning, if you can," she added in a whisper. It was a gloomy party that went home through the soft evening. During Anthea's remarks, Robert had again made play with the pin and the bicycle tire, and the lamb, whom they had to call St. Maur, or Devereaux, or Hilary, seemed really at last to have had his fill of bicycle mending. So the machine was wheeled, which kept them all together. The sun was just on the point of setting when they arrived at the White House. The 4 elder children would have liked to linger in the lane till the complete sun-setting turned the grown-up lamb, whose Christian names I will not further weary you by repeating, into their own dear, tiresome baby brother, but he, in his grown-upness, insisted on going on, and thus he was met in the front garden by Martha. Oh dear, what's going to happen? Now, you remember that as a special favour, the Psammead had arranged that the servants in the house should never notice any change brought about by the wishes of the children. Therefore, Martha merely saw the usual party with the baby lamb, about whom she had been desperately anxious all the afternoon, trotting beside Anthea on fat baby legs, while the children, of course, still saw the grown-up lamb, never mind what names he was christened by. And Martha rushed at him and caught him in her arms, exclaiming, hang on, I'll just get you the picture. Martha caught him up in her arms, exclaiming, "Come to his own Martha, then, a precious poppet." The grown-up lamb, whose name shall now be buried in oblivion, struggled furiously. An expression of intense horror and annoyance was seen on his face, but Martha was stronger than he. She lifted him up and carried him into the house. The grown-up lamb struggled. She's holding him up. What a hoot. Martha was stronger than he. She lifted him up and carried him into the house. None of the children will ever forget that picture. The neat, grey flannel-suited, grown-up young man with the green necktie and the little black moustache, fortunately he was slightly built and not tall, struggling in the sturdy arms of Martha, who bore him away helpless, imploring him as she went to be a good boy now and come and have his nice brimmink, whatever that is. Fortunately, the sun set as they reached the doorstep. The bicycle disappeared, and Martha was seen to carry into the house the real, live, darling, sleepy 2-year-old lamb. The grown-up lamb, nameless henceforth, was gone forever. "Forever," said Cyril, "because as soon as ever the lamb's old enough to be bullied, we must jolly well begin to bully him for his own sake, so that he mayn't grow up like that." "You shan't bully him," said Anthea stoutly. "Not if I can stop it. We must tame him by kindness," said Jane. "You see," said Robert, "if he grows up in the usual way, there'll be plenty of time to correct him as he goes along. The awful thing today was his growing up so suddenly. There was no time to improve him at all." "He doesn't want any improving," said Anthea, as the voice of the lamb came cooing through the open door, just as she heard it in her heart that afternoon. "Me loves Panty. Me wants to come to own Panty." That's Anthea. And there you go. Oh my goodness me. Not a wish I would have thought of, but I can see how that one worked. Yes. Oh, what's going to happen next? This one's, I don't think it's going to be gory, but that has the potential to it. I'm not reading it today. I'm just going to give you a teaser. The next chapter, chapter 10, is called Scalps, and it starts by saying probably the day would have been a greater success if Cyril had not been reading The Last of the Mohicans. Yes. And we'll have that next time we have a story, which will probably be, what's today? Today in New Zealand is Monday. Probably be Wednesday, 2 days from now. Anyway, so we'll see you next time. And don't forget to follow, to subscribe, to ring the notification bell, depending on where you are, so that you can know when you can hear the next story. If you follow me on Instagram, I usually post a picture earlier in the afternoon before I'm going to be reading. And that's another way to find out when I'm going to be reading. And usually my Instagram account actually has a link in the bio, so it will take you to my Twitch channel. So there you go. All those things you can do. And that way you won't miss out. And I hope you have a wonderful time between now and when we next meet.